Yeah, hello! The main talking point of this video is build updates and how damage are calculated. We want to make this sort of educational video, so that you know how to adapt to gear changing and new patches. And not just blindly follow a fixed build, which probably will get outdated every time there is a new update. By the way, I am going to set a timer here to see how long this nightmare dungeon run takes. We want to start by talking about the purpose of playing video game. At least in our case, we play for fun, probably same as many other sorcerers out there. We started off with what was considered the best build at the time, and that was Ice Shard build. But the problem is that it is a one-button build, and Ice Shard being a primary single target ability, causes repetitive action. We find this boring, and patch 1.0.3 just hit, which brings buff to almost all other less used skills that are not Ice Shard. We figured that's the opportunity to reset and fell in love with this build. Imagine at the end of workday, you're tired and want to slay some demons. Instead of repeatedly clicking mobs, we just spam orbs at general directions. Now let's talk about damage. We don't want to bore you with math about damage per second and how big your damage can tick. People oftentimes get overwhelmed by that. And frankly speaking, we don't have that amount of time to test and compute between different builds. So our focus is on how consistent and fast you can clear dungeons. You will get a good general idea of what to spec for if you know where damage is coming from. In particular, Sorcerer has big damage swing of like 10-fold if enemy is CC'd or not. You probably have experienced yourself how much faster you kill if the mobs are frozen. For example, Frost Nova upgrade that makes them vulnerable. This boss fight is a very good example of demonstration. Also, a good tip about this build when fighting boss is focus on building their CC gate first, which is that yellow line below boss HP. When filled, they are stunned for X amount of seconds and become vulnerable. You want to save your mana when that moment is approaching, so you can spend it all to burst the boss down. At this stage, the boss is considered vulnerable and under crow control. You can see how fast boss HP drops. At that stage, all your deal X% amount of damage to immobilized, stunned or frozen enemies kicks in. Our Paragon board somewhat follows this trend. A lot of nodes follow vs chilled or frozen, vs stunned, vs burning, or X% vulnerable damage. Those stats are useless until you bring mobs into that state. This is why you see almost every build uses this aspect, which increases your total damage when enemies are CC'd. With that said, let's take a look at one of the node buffs for Frozen Orb. Chance of making enemies vulnerable increased from 25% to 30%, because all your multipliers apply when enemy is vulnerable. That extra 5% suddenly sounds a lot bigger, doesn't it? With that out of the way, let's talk about updates to our build since last video. We dropped Inferno for Frost Nova, mainly because we picked up this gear. Remember we mentioned about the pull effect of Fire Snake? Well, Raiment of the Infinite, which pull and stun enemies after teleport basically does the same thing. You see here how gear influences skill choices. For instance, we use Node that applies extra chill effect. And we were able to get away with not using Frost Nova because some of the gears we have, and Lucky Hit Chance for the sole purpose of proccing certain abilities. For example, Frostburn, which gives chance to freeze on lucky hits, Penitent Greaves, which leave behind trail of frost that chills, and deal more damage to chilled enemies. But if you don't have these gears and finding hard to freeze enemies, picking up Frost Nova early is also a good option. We went with the upgrade that makes enemies vulnerable for reasons we specified earlier. You might have noticed we have been throwing frozen orbs around non-stop at non-elite mobs without Blizzard. That's helped by picking up Mother's Embrace. We get a resource cost refund if core skill hits 5 or more enemies, which is not easy to achieve because frozen orb radius and travel distance. This together with Avalanche passive can give us free passive core skill, as well as 40% increased damage. This is then double if enemies are vulnerable. Again, you see vulnerable multiplier here. This combines with aspect that gives another free cast, which is what fuels our almost infinite mana. So this run took us 3 minutes and 43 seconds. As you can see, we were not exactly trying to speedrun, since we will be doing events and picking up stuff. And sometimes run in circle because we don't research the map beforehand, lol. For demo of consistency purposes, we immediately follow with another run. For the best farming result, we recommend picking dungeon with mobs levels that are 3 levels or higher than you, because that's where you get highest experience bonus. For instance, monster is 1 level above character gives 15%, 2 levels above character gives 20%, and 3 or more cap at 25%. With the recent buff to experience for nightmare dungeons as well as ability to fast travel, it is currently the best farming method. The reward experience bonus also scales with dungeon tier levels. However, we recommend not getting too cocky and picking very high tiers, because at high tier, our main bottleneck becomes getting one-shot by basically anything that moves. Let's talk about inherent problem of Blizzard damage design. By design nature, sorcerers have very high intelligence, which translates to resistance. This has a few problems. First, this only applies to elemental damage you receive. Majority of mobs that you probably die to are from physical damage. This is why we recommend socketing skull in your jewelry, which boosts armor. Secondly, sorcerer has access to a total of 200 armor from paragon nodes. Comparatively, rogue has 4,400, barb has 2,750, druid has 2,250, and necro has 1,350. With armor currently being best defense stat, we are inherently very squishy. The problem with resistance being very weak is due to only contribute half damage reduction by system design. This combines with World Tier 4, which sees 40% penalty in non-physical attack defense, effectively puts a soft cap of 35% non-physical damage reduction. You might think we have access to barriers would mitigate that. However, the problem is barrier cap at your base HP. That is, before any plus HP multiplier, for example from gem or gear. This is why higher tiers become ineffective to farm, even if we have enough damage. But with higher probability of dying, this delays your time to complete. This is where this build shines compared to traditional Ice Shard build. Our ability to cast a lot of AoE damage lets us to spam from a safe distance. We got asked about what our enchantments are from last video, so mentioning again, they are Ice Shard and Frozen Orb. Remainder skill tree, gear, and paragon board have no change, so for those please refer to our previous video. We will leave you here with the remaining run. Thank you for watching.